Welcome, everyone. I'm Christopher Hawthorne. I'm the Chief Design Officer for the City of Los Angeles. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the fifth and final listening session that we've organized as part of the Low Rise Housing Initiative that we're working on. On the screen, you'll see our partners and supporters, and I want to thank all of them. And I want to thank my colleague Alejandro Gonzalez in particular for helping to organize and conceptualize really all of these sessions. We've had 5 panels on themes really central to housing debates in Los Angeles, particularly as they relate to single family and low rise neighborhoods across the city. And tonight we're going to be talking with a group of experts in community land trusts and other cooperative housing models to help us think about how those, I think, in some ways very exciting and in some other ways nascent efforts to introduce community land trust approaches across Los Angeles are really helping to inform policy now as we think about the future of these neighborhoods. The goal of all of these sessions, as many of you will know, is really to inform a design challenge that we'll be launching later in October. And we really want to send the message that this is not a design competition in a traditional sense. We want to ground these efforts in a conversation that is specific and organic to Los Angeles. I think many of us felt that too often the conversation about single family neighborhoods and low rise communities across the city and their future has been reacting to proposals from Sacramento or to a national conversation. And we really wanted to reorient this discussion here locally. And I think in our first 4 conversations, we've really gone a long way toward doing that. And I'm excited to hear how this discussion this evening will unfold. And to help us facilitate is Cynthia Strathman, who's the Executive Director of Strategic Actions for a Just Economy, or SAGE. She'll also be, she'll be sort of doing double duty. She'll also be acting as a panelist because she brings a lot of particular experience and expertise to this conversation. So having said all that, I want to thank all of you for being here. Thank our panelists, thank our audience members. Look forward to hearing your questions. Before I turn it over to Cynthia, if you do have questions as the conversation proceeds, please put them in the chat or the Q&A. Alejandro and I will field them and do our best to send them up to Cynthia so she can incorporate them into the conversation. So again, thanks for being here. Thanks for your participation and your interest, and I'll hand it over to Cynthia.
Well, hello, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us here tonight. It's really great to see so many people who are interested in this design challenge and the larger context that Christopher outlined. I'm going to start by saying a little bit about who I am, and then I'm going to allow all of the different speakers to introduce themselves, and we'll get started with this discussion. My name is Cynthia Strathman. I am the Executive Director of SAGE. SAGE is a nonprofit in South Los Angeles, and our mission is to support community leadership and power. And we do that mostly through supporting tenant rights, healthy housing, and equitable development. We're known historically as having been one of the first groups to really use community benefit agreements a lot. And we're very involved in the support and passage of Measure J, which gave rise to the Transit-Oriented Communities program here in Los Angeles. We've been very concerned with issues around equitable development, land use, density, really with an eye towards creating a livable city for everybody where how much money you make isn't the determining factor in whether or not you have a voice in how the city is built and how the city is run, and where we can have a really inclusive city for everybody that has, clean streets, good transportation, clean air, and open green spaces. So that's a little bit about SAGE. We're also a grassroots membership-based organization of mostly low-income families. And I'm gonna leave off there then and introduce some of our other panelists. I'll go in alphabetical order then and start with Leslie, who hopefully can tell you a bit about herself and her organization, and also a little bit about how she defines a land trust and what she thinks land trusts accomplish in particular.
Okay, thanks, Cynthia. Hi, everyone. My name is Leslie Eze. I'm a resident member of the Beverly Vermont Community Land Trust, or BVCLT. And yeah, I've been so fortunate, blessed to be a tenant on CLT property for the past 10 years. And just having that privilege has really driven me to pay it forward and help other tenants get the same benefit I have, which is permanently affordable, tenant-controlled housing. I mean, I can't begin to express how beneficial that is, especially in this current climate with the pandemic. So I've been doing everything I can, specifically helping with grant writing support and mediation to help tenants get the resources they need and help, you know, coordinate with each other, cooperate with each other to get to that place of collective ownership. And regarding BVCLT, just to also combine that with what the CLT is, BVCLT, like many CLTs, they essentially are nonprofit organizations that have their ear to the ground in terms of what the community needs. So if it's housing, or if it's green space like gardening, or if it's affordable commercial space, the job of the CLT is to meet the needs of its community and to provide those resources. So with BVCLT, they have the dual role of providing permanently affordable tenant-controlled housing, but also they have an ecological mission to do it in a sustainable and ecological way. So we have a community, we have plenty of gardening spaces that allows for that. We also have a bike shop that that it supports, Relampago, which is very much a community hub. So it's just, I mean, the possibilities are endless, and it's focused on what the community needs. So I'll leave it there.
Thanks, Leslie. I guess if I'm going to keep with my alphabetical order scenario, I will move on then to Oscar from Trust South Los Angeles. Oscar, do you want to introduce yourself and talk a little bit about Trust South LA, and also talk about how you define a land trust and what you think land trusts are especially good for?
Thank you, Cynthia. Thank you, Leslie. And thank you, everyone, for having us and spending this time to talk about community land trusts. It's something that we can't never stop talking about it. We need to have community ownership in Los Angeles. And also just want to quickly add that I'm here to just on behalf of Edgar Campos, our executive director. He unfortunately had a family emergency, so he asked me to cover for him. And again, I'm Oscar with Trust South LA. Their associate director. Trust South LA stands for Tenemos que reclamar y unidos salvar la tierra, or Together We Must Reclaim and Save the Earth. Trust South LA has a over 15 years old history in South Central Los Angeles. Came from a lot of coalition work. I think Cynthia didn't mention this piece, but Trust South LA was born out of a coalition work with SAGE, Esperanza, City Tech, and many others who were fighting to have a permanent solution against the displacement occurring from all the private development and public development on the Figueroa corridor. And so Trust South LA, since then, we've grown our scope of work to a lot of social justice work, including environmental justice, focused on an area on the Slauson corridor in South Central Los Angeles and throughout South Central, mobility justice, right, to get funding to have more bike lanes to decrease fatalities, as South Central is known for having the highest injury network throughout, I guess, in all of California. Actually, there's two intersections in South Central that are prime for fatalities. And so now the work that we're doing, right, and what we do is, as a community land trust, is look for places to acquire, working with developers. We've developed 140 units already on Roland Curtis Gardens across from USC, and with a tenant-led struggle to make sure that the folks that were living there before could be part of the decision-making to see what could happen in Roland Curtis. And so we just did the grand opening last year in November. And also, I guess, more focused with this work, with the conversation today, is our preservation work, right? How can we keep our neighborhoods intact in our communities with the folks that live there. Unidad has a very famous saying about better neighborhoods, same neighbors, right? With the saying of like, we want to advocate for our communities to be healthier and more livable and with a dignified way, right? But also making sure that those developments are for our neighbors. And in terms of defining a community land trust, there's over 240 community land trusts operating in the United States at this moment. The CLT is meant to function in a flexible manner to steward land underneath any of those rental properties, leased land to folks, to cooperatives, as Leslie was mentioning for their work, to single-family homeowners, to affordable housing developers, nonprofits. I could name that recently one of the first community land trusts in the U.S., New Communities Land Trust in Georgia, just celebrated their 50th anniversary, and this is like the stemming of all community land trusts in the U.S., right? A Black-led struggle. There's a lot of racial justice that goes into our work, and there's now 6,000 acres of farmland that are collectively stewarded by Black farmers in Georgia, right? So I just want to elevate that this work is to provide home ownership and community ownership opportunities for folks of color, for Black, Indigenous people of color, right? And it's important to elevate that piece of, it's a necessity, right? Folks are left out of the market, right? In terms of their abilities to be able to have ownership of their land. So the community land trust model is a tool for us to be able to organize and actively have a say in what development and what the activities are in our community. Right? Thank you for that chance, Cynthia, to explain that.
Well, thank you, Oscar. I now would like to pass it over to Sua to talk a little bit about her organization and their work, and also a little bit about land trusts and what they accomplish in that context.
Hi, my name is Sua, and I'm here representing the El Sereno Community Land Trust. And three things really stand out for me when it comes to land trust. And the first is kind of the way that it's really a pathway for folks, as Leslie said, to eventually have an ownership interest in the property, whether it be in the structure or the land or both. And the second thing is it really does a lot of the principles and land trusts in the area really base themselves on tenant involvement. Whether those tenants are currently part owner or not, there is a strong emphasis on making sure that they're involved at all levels of decision making on the property, which is something that I think is really beneficial over the long term. And the third is relates back to how we can get to the place where we share in that equity. And the reason I like that is because there is a pathway. So, you know, the involvement of the resident is the first step, but over time you can kind of understand where folks are at financially and in their involvement in the care of the property. And you can really then begin to change the model of that ownership. And if folks are only at the level of renting, then so be it, but they're still involved in all levels of decision making. And over time, as folks, you know, as families grow, folks start coming into the job market within the family, you know, kids become teenagers and adults, start contributing to the household income, they can be in a better place to own. And by that time, you already have the deep relationships with each other and the deep relationships with current ownership to transition into a more cooperative form of equity sharing.
Well, thank you, Sua. I think I'll get started with a few questions for the panelists, and maybe I'll go in reverse order this time, if you don't mind, to just mix it up a little bit. And I think the first thing I'm curious about is everybody here works in a community, and every community is a little bit different, and yet also people have, you know, very similar needs. What, in your opinion, do communities really want to see in terms of housing, in terms of the design of housing? What works for them, and what are you know, if your imagination could run wild, what would you like to see? And what do you think that they would like to see? Sua, can we start with you?
Yeah, just making sure. So That's a kind of a loaded question. I wish I would have gotten last. I feel like the community wants to see itself reflected in whatever decisions the city takes at all levels, you know? That's another thing CLTs are really beneficial for, because you begin at that level, right? Really being engaged and involved in planning, because you're planning the space that you live in, right? But it's sort of as you move into the different kind of levels of planning around a neighborhood, I think that they're just the reflection of not only what they're saying, but the makeup of the community economically, and at all levels, really. Did that answer your question?
I think it does. I mean, I think there's so many ways, like you said, to answer that question. You know, do you mean the built environment, who you live with, how you live there, what the public space is like?
Yeah, it's everything. Like, you know, should that be a park? Should that be green space? Should that be a learning hub? Should that, you know, it's all of those things, but also the reflection of who lives there. You know, sometimes we get developments that are like singles or one bedrooms in a community that has large families, and you're like, what the heck?
Yeah.
So, you know, those are the things that community, I think, want to see, is that reflection of them and whatever's being built or designed or incorporated into it.
Yeah, and I think that that's a great illustration, the bedroom, the number of bedrooms, because of course, you know, what we see a lot of times, people living in South Los Angeles, they'll be living in a 2-bedroom, but a 2-bedroom from 1920, you know, was very differently shaped, and in some ways works much better for big families than a modern 2-bedroom that could be, you know, whatever, 600 square feet or something. Leslie and Oscar, did you want to chime in on this? On like, what do you think the families and the people who are living in your communities kind of want to see in housing?
Yeah, I resonate with what Sua mentioned about just, you know, making sure there's inclusion throughout the process of what the community needs. And I think Oscar mentioned like the flexibility of, you know, because community needs change. So I think if we're thinking in terms of how the city could support, just having mechanisms that, like for instance, zoning, that makes it flexible for to kind of make sure it meets the needs of the community at various times. And speaking specifically for me in this current time, I feel like green spaces has been so key in my housing co-op. I've noticed that has been a vital lifeline for a lot of my neighbors, and myself included. I'm not a green thumb by any means, but just being able to look at the beautiful green spaces and you know, and benefiting from eating food from there that they generously provide has been amazing. So yeah, it's just flexibility, green spaces, and addressing, I mean, the big question is homelessness and having enough housing for people. I think it's very urgent right now.
For sure, I think that's a good point that we should keep in mind. Of like, how are we also creating neighborhoods for everybody in addition to neighborhoods that work for the people we already have here? Oscar, do you want to chime in on this question, or?
Yeah, no, just echoing Leslie's point on the flexibility piece. I think it's key, and making sure that the folks that are living there have a say in the moments of change, right? And I was gonna say that, like, very simple, like probably folks want to see their neighbors stay in their communities and their families be able to stay in their communities, right, and grow in their communities. I think that's super key, to be able to decide, like, we want to stay here, we're gonna stay here. Like, folks should have that ability. So I think that's super key. And but I guess I know this conversation goes into like the low rising piece, and I don't know if it's like new development, right? Like, how far deeply into that are we going to get into it? But just don't, if is your question kind of like touching into that, right? New development versus preservation, or the scale of housing?
You know, I think we can touch on whatever we want, and I'd really encourage, you know, everyone to just chime in when they have something to say. You know, certainly the question of density and what's appropriate density has been a really big ongoing one in California and in Los Angeles. And you know, that I think that's a great question of like, what do you three think about density?
Starting with Sua again.
You can start wherever. How about I just release you? You can start wherever you like, and we'll keep it a little bit more free flowing.
Go for it, Oscar.
Sorry, I'm using my phone and my Zoom, so I have to double unmute. I guess I don't know. It's been a really hard question because we're projected to keep growing, right? And so it's a tough question. And at the same time, we have like the RENAs, right? The regional housing assessments, and I forget what the N stands for, but like let's just say that there's a requirement by all of us to follow to have affordable housing in our communities, right? And it's like when we're thinking about the conversation about density, we should also be thinking about, and scaling because of need of population growth, we should also be thinking about how we put more teeth on making sure there's housing for, the very low income, the extremely low income, like the 30%, below 30% AMI, right? Like all the AMIs, and not just be thinking about, how are we gonna have all this housing, right, to meet the growing populations, but not really talking about what are the requirements to ensure there's like housing for the most vulnerable in our communities, right? Just thinking about that, I think they go together for me. So I'm dodging your question by saying we have to connect it with another question.
For me, I can't speak on the Land Trust's behalf on this one, but I just want to be able to, live near my family. Eventually my nephews and my kids are going to grow up and need a place, right? And I don't know if I want to be their place forever. So I'm torn on this one because I also really appreciate looking up at the sky. And so we need a balance, right? And so I think what that balance is, again, really depends on the different layers of those needs. That open space that Leslie was talking about earlier, mixed in with the ability to have multiple generations live near each other, and the affordability to let that happen. I don't know, I want my kids to be able to rent down the street.
Yeah, I mean, I would really echo that. I have kids and I'd really like them to be able to stay here, in Los Angeles if they want to. I mean, I didn't grow up here, but my mom did and my grandparents did. And it's, a very familiar place. It's our hometown. And you look at it now and you're like, I don't really understand how young people are expected to stay here, if they aren't already if they didn't already get into the system.
Right. Yeah, I mean, there is a balance, definitely, but personally, speaking for myself, I'm for densifying. There's this developer, I'm forgetting the developer's name, but they had this really interesting idea of looking at single family home and converting them into co-houses where they still meet the R1 single family home code, but you're creating multiple bedrooms and bathrooms for other tenants to live in, and they share a living room space and a kitchen space. And I think that's brilliant. I mean, and I think there's a way you could design that to look very pleasing. So, it doesn't need to be like a boxy thing, but then you create more housing, more affordable housing. And it would be great to have, to incentivize, if the city can incentivize single family homeowners to build, to densify what their spaces they have, to create more housing, in addition to incentivizing ADUs. And I think there's a way to do that in a way that's not like, claustrophobic, but, creates more density, creates more community, and there could be spaces, with some intention, there could be some green spaces within those co-housing, shared living spaces. So I think it's possible. It just requires some collective, thinking on it.
I feel like we're getting at a couple of different issues here. One is that we need more housing for all of the people who live here, who are going to live here. You know, I think we hear all the time about people who are leaving Los Angeles because they just can't afford a place to live. And that's very sad, you know, when people are forced away from their home just because they don't, you know, have enough money to afford an exorbitant apartment. And I think there's another question of like, how do we live in these spaces with people who may not be living the stereotypical norm for what, you know, American housing was built for 80 years ago, you know, and that's the age of some of our housing stock. I mean, I know a lot of SAGE members live in multi-generational households, you know, kids grow up and stay at home. Even when people have the money to afford other houses, maybe they don't want to move far away from each other. You know, maybe they like to live, and you see people buying houses next door. And so how do we create a built environment that has the flexibility to allow for all of those different kinds of formations? And how does density play into that?
Well, regarding the city, and I would love to hear, I mean, in addition to fellow panelists, the general audience regarding this, but yeah, I would love to see more partnerships with the city and CLTs because, as I mentioned earlier, I think CLTs, I believe CLTs have direct connection to the community. So more partnerships, more, you know, in every step of the process, more inclusion with CLT reps, with just community members in general. I mean, yes, it does slow the process down a bit, I guess, in terms of if there's a certain timeline that needs to be done. But the outcome, I think it's worth it because the outcome is you have everyone, you know, satisfied with the end result. And that's what you want, you know, it's worth that time. So I think this is brilliant what we're doing right now, creating these listening sessions. I think that's a great step. I just hope it continues to have there's more spaces to have dialogue and take action items from this to, you know, and implement them so that we can have spaces that we all share and are proud of and, you know, that we feel good about.
Do any of you have thoughts on what are the best ways to bring some of these solutions to scale and how to get these implemented in a more widespread way?
Cynthia, so before jumping on that one, I just wanted to add a thought, right, that I think it's and I hope that it relates to crossing fingers. That's it. So just wanted to like share with any like folks that are planners out there, right? Like, you know, at least for myself, right, going to through planning school and like, oh, like we can do land use, we can do this density, we can do zoning. Like, how do we use the, you know, those cool words, right? Smart growth and like, you know, density, the missing middle, right? Like all these terms, right? In terms of like, what can the city do to like incentivize developers to come in and develop, right, our communities and basically, you know, I call them incentives, right? But they're subsidizing people's wealth in a way, right? Like they're basically allowing for some people to be able to make more money out of the land, right? That's what the city has the power to do, right? If they are able to increase the density on something, that means they have more tenants, right? And I'm just talking about residential right now, right? And I think that a key thing that we need to do better, and I think it's starting to happen with a lot of students organizing in these schools, right? Is like transforming the whole system of learning, right? Of challenging what we're learning in terms of like, wait, this process is not equitable and does not have equitable outcomes. You know, and it would be really great to have those conversations with the city about, you know, with them and being honest and you know, seeing how much subsidy they provided to investors, developers in our communities, right? And making them be like, hey, like, you subsidize that development by allowing it to grow in this way or to change the zoning in this way. How about you do the same thing for, you know, those community land trusts, those smaller developers that are trying to do the housing work, right, the stabilization work. And I think that hopefully this ties to your piece, right, about like how can we move forward. I think that we need to first expose that piece, right, that the cities are, you know, every time they allow for development, right, like when they go through their entitlement process, that they're allowing for an investor to be able to, you know, reap the benefits of our communities and our neighborhoods, right, and they're not doing the same with us, right. So I just wanted to, I guess, I hope that comes into it. And I see comment from our one of our members at Trust LA, Blanca Lucio, right? And I hope that we do have interpretation here, because that's another piece, right? Making sure that everyone could be part of the conversations. And I would translate it or interpret for myself if we have more time, but I don't know if we have more time. So I'll just hopeful that we have our conversations with our other, you know, neighborhood members, right? Thank you.
Could we actually get some of the voices that are coming through to speak on some of these questions as well? I saw a couple of comments. I know Sarita had one of them that I kind of wanted her to unpack a little bit. Is it possible to allow her to? Or like open up the mic for her?
Yeah, definitely. Sarita, feel free to unmute yourself and provide your comments, please.
And then I see that Paul also had something to say.
So I think we're just waiting here for Sarita and Paul.
All right. Well, I don't know.
Is there anyone on the phone who wants these read aloud? Let's look. I think everybody's online.
Oh, okay. Somebody's asking for interpretation again. So maybe we should do something for that. Oscar, I don't know if you want to start interpreting. Okay, so I mean, to Oscar's point, that I do think that ultimately, while we're talking about density here, where the core of it is the ability for everyone to share in that density or in that thought process, and that, you know, in the way that we're sharing that resource through that density and how those benefits are coming through, right? I do think that folks do end up making a little bit of money on all sides, whether it be in all sides of real estate. There's somebody's making money somewhere. Somebody's keeping it somehow at some level, right? And not everything. I've seen transactions where that little something is shared among more, right? Among more people. And so we need more of that, and we need it to go deeper. Whether you're paying rent or a mortgage, it still ends up going to the mortgage. Whether it's in a rent payment or not, I'm still contributing to it somehow. I'm still contributing to operations as a renter, you know. But what I'm not sharing in is, as a renter, what that resource ends up creating for the owner or the entity that owns it. So it'd be nice if we could just share that more at all levels, regardless of whether you're paying rent or mortgage.
Yeah. I mean, I think that brings up a good question too, of what is the resource? Is the resource a commodity that we're trying to maximize profit from, or is it the resource a place where we can live? Because, you know, currently we see an awful lot of housing that's not really being lived in, right? It's kept vacant as an investment product. It's being rented as a hotel room. You know, it's a pied-à-terre. It's not really a home in that way. And so when you start to take what ostensibly is housing stock and turn it into something that's not really housing, I think it does raise that question of like, how is this a resource? Like, what kind of a resource is this? is it a financial resource, or is it a resource that we're using to sort of inhabit?
Resource that we're using and taking advantage of. Somebody is, right? And so that's the problem, is how we talk about it to begin
Yeah.
with. We should-
And what we prioritize, because I think also, you know, if it's designed to make money, that's not really the same thing as designing something to house people. So
Right, right. And so, but we need a lot, right? We need to do, like, housing is one thing, but, you know, we got to also think about not all land wants to have a house on top of it, or should, right? So we go back to what Leslie said, it's that kind of balance, and that a place to kind of shelter yourself and be safe while also having these added benefits, because, you know, we've all been stuck in our house, I don't know how long, and how many people don't have that? They don't even have a balcony to come out to, you know? So balance, I guess.
yeah.
Hi, Miss Kim.
Hi. Hi, y'all. Okay. I have a comment. Now, I'm not originally from here, but I'm from Chicago, but half of my life has been spent in Chicago, and now the other half is here in Los Angeles in the Crenshaw district. And for a time, 15 years as a matter of fact, I lived in Leimert Park. But I lived in Leimert Park that had the units. 4 units, you know, there was a area of homes, single family homes. And then there was an area of Leimert Park that lent to units, more than not 4 units, two levels, 4 units. And in terms of, you know, developers not coming in to make a profit, but to try and house people at a reasonable rate, I think maybe that type of housing should be looked at again. Because right now I live south of Leimert Park, which is Angeles Mesa, and it's mainly the single family houses. But at some point, some of the area could be devoted to 4 units, 2 levels, not higher than 2 levels, and this is in the inner enclave of the neighborhood. And on the perimeters, instead of the no parking and all of that, they could build no higher than 3 stories, and the ground level could be commercial. And you know, that this is my idea of the missing middle that you all keep talking about, which I think maybe should take a look at how it was planned out, you know, some time ago, especially that Leimert Park model, that some of the area is single family, and some of the area is 4 units, not higher than 2 stories. Something on that order could be looked at. And, you know, this the parking situation is gravely impacting South LA, because this is South LA that I'm talking about, because developers, they're allowing developers to come in to build these 5- and 6-story buildings, let's say 100 units, and no parking. So where are they going to park? And this is right on the perimeter of single family housing. So where are they going to park? And you know, you cannot build people out of their cars. So like Leslie says, there has to be some kind of balance with the housing that's being built, and the developers, you know, have to stop developing for profit. We have to strongly encourage these developers to stop building for profit and build for people. You know, because there is a development coming up now on Slauson and Bryanhurst, and it's 63 units, and half of the units are studios. in a community, in a family-oriented community, you know, I could understand if it was 2 and 3 bedrooms, but you know, half of the units are studios, and who are they building them for? And it's 5 stories, and it's no parking. You know what I'm saying? This TOC
Yeah.
is gravely impacting. You know, the only community I know right now is South LA. It's gravely impacting South LA. You know, because they're giving now these developers all these incentives, and naturally they're going to take advantage of it. But I think if you want to consider, or if you know this missing middle that we're talking about, that's a model that I think should be looked at in terms of growth and in terms of housing people, and not in terms of just, you know, developing for profit. And like Cynthia said, you know, a number of these units that have been built are vacant, you know, so they're not considering affordable housing, the homeless,
Mr. Egan, you're-
anybody else. They're only considering, you know, what kind of profit can they make. But
Yeah.
they're sitting vacant, and I think we city should start charging them some kind of vacancy tax. You know,
Well, I think a
if
vacancy,
this building is going to be vacant for, and it's not of trying to house people. You know, it's just
yeah.
that model of Leimert Park with the housing and with the 4 units, not higher than two levels, as a missing middle kind of situation.
I think that sounds like
That's it.
a really interesting idea. And I was wondering, because I know Oscar working at Roland Curtis has had, we're trying to develop something similar. How do the other panelists think about how that kind of model would work in their neighborhoods? And it would be an economically diverse model, right? Because you have that mix of units, of single family homes, of corner stores.
Sorry, I'm like coughing. Thank you, Ms. Kim, for sharing that. And Cynthia, I can share a little bit about what we went through with Slauson and Wall. Most recently, RCG was just before my time at Trust South LA, so I know there was a whole NIMBYism and whole thing to probably do a course on, a college course on. But at Slauson and Wall, I started working with the folks in this corridor about 3 years ago, and this is basically a 7-acre lot. And the first things, you know, meeting with folks, right, the first things that come up is that, yes, well, the parking lot becomes an issue, like for who are we building, right? Right, who's the housing for? And then the other piece is like, can we just get a 7-acre lot park space, right? So like a huge park space. Something that we went through this year as we were looking at submitting a proposal for the city to develop the site is learning from those lessons of, you know, what else should be like kind of transitioning from, you know, from like single family. There was like some that were, you know, 2 floors, right? But what can we do so that folks could be okay with the development on this site? And we decided to propose some homes for purchase, like almost like condominium style, at the southern side that will be neighboring the properties, the homes already there, the single family homes already there. Make them 2 floors in height, and you know, looking at ways that we can provide homeownership for low and moderate income folks in the community, right? So that it's not just, you know, it's not out of the pocket of the folks that live in that area. So there was about, I guess I won't say the number, but there was a good number of units for 3 and 2 bedroom units that are for sale, that will be like acting as that missing middle, acting as a transition for the other uses in the 7 acres lot. And then the other, I guess, the west facing section of this 7 acre lot will be for the 30, 50, and 60% AMI folks. The more of like the LIHTC, how the developers create the 100% affordable housing units, right? But there's like buffers. That's what I'm trying to explain. There's buffers of of how we can create this and try to like address some of the issues that the folks don't want. They don't want a 3 or 4 floor story building, right there next to their backyard, right? And I guess we have a bunch of other uses in this 7 acres, but I just wanted to like name, that was like, I think that's something critical that comes into this, right? How do we create buffers from like low to medium to like high density, and also create, I guess, going to an earlier conversation about what we want. We probably want to create opportunities for economic mobility amongst our neighbors, right? So that they don't have to stay. So if they get a better job, they don't have, and they get kicked out of those, affordable housing units, right? That they have a place to go to, and that if they're, growing their credit, right, and growing their income, that they actually have an opportunity for actual ownership, right in their neighborhood. Just wanted to add those pieces, I guess. I hope that they kind of relate to what Ms. Kim was also saying earlier.
Yeah, no, totally. And I think that sounds like a great example. I'm wondering if we can start to move through some of the questions in the chat, because it seems like there's some great comments in there. One of the first ones I've got here is, do any of you know of a successful example where apartment living is coupled with tenant ownership under a land trust or a co-op? That's actually kind of a yes or no question, but feel free to expound.
Just to make sure I understand, apartment that has been converted into a co-op with the help of CLT?
We're converted to, it sounds like a co-op or a land trust, so that there's some sort of mechanism for tenant ownership there.
Okay. Oh, I mean, oh, go ahead. You want to say something, Sula? Oh, I live on such property. So Us2 Urban Soil Terra Urbana is a cooperative owned by the tenants through, the tenants formed a 501c3 limited equity housing co-op. It's two buildings, about, I want to say 40 units. So we collectively own the buildings while Beverly Vermont Community Land Trust owns the land underneath it, which makes the buildings, the improvements, more affordable to purchase and manage. So yeah, so it's not very feasible, but it's feasible. It is difficult to do that, but it's definitely possible. And there's other examples too. I know there's the Marathon Cooperative. I don't know if they use a CLT, but I know they're a limited equity housing co-op, and I'm sure there's others, but that's what comes to my mind.
It's a somewhat related question here too about how do we communicate about land trusts? If governments are more inclined to let private developers develop for lots of reasons, if we've seen recently with our elected officials in City Hall generating lots of excitement in the newspaper. If there's lots of reasons for them to favor for-profit development, then what are the arguments that we can make constructively to support land trusts? I feel like you guys should be deeply immersed in this because you talk about this all the time.
Well, one of the challenges with affordability that especially slumlords, I think, like to use, and it's not really that much of a challenge if you know what you're doing, is that the operating cost of a property needs to be able to be covered by whatever money is coming in, right? For the property, and that whether, the money is being contributed or being paid in as rent or however it may be, right? But we have to be able to maintain the structure of the building. And so I think land trusts are really a good way to kind of be able to monitor expenditure, like that spending, those expenses collaboratively, right? And when you do that, I think it's a very different dynamic than when you're not really have sort of a sense of awareness of what some of those expenses are. And a good example is water. You know, if we're able to understand that, yeah, most, if not all the time, the landlord pays the water, and he might be saying, or she might be saying, or the entity might be saying, hey, you know, I'm spending tons of water, that's why I have to raise your rent. Well, that's a different conversation than if you're actually looking at how much is being spent in water every month, right? And if your goal is to make sure that your rent stays, or your mortgage payment or your contribution to the shared stuff on site stays such that you don't have to increase the amount that you're giving, then you're participating in that care of that expense, right? And that monitoring. It's a different conversation, because you know, you can always come back and say, what are you talking about? We use less water, get out of here. You know, and you have that ability, because you know what the money is going to, you know how it's being spent. And I'm, you know, strongly of the belief that the only thing that should drive an increase in the cost of your living is how much it's costing you to take care of it, right? It has to be cared for regularly. And if you know what that is, and you know whether your rent is going up or your contribution is going up or whatever, right? So that's what I like about land trusts, that land trusts allow it.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Thank you. So I just want to add to this question, and I think Roger, this question is so great. I had to read it like 3-4 times to make sure I was like truly like in line with, like intact with it. And I think it's a really important question to be asking, because I think that it goes deeper into like what makes it right. You know, there's been a lot of, you know, I'll say it here, and I'm okay with being recorded, right? There's been a lot of corruption in our city with development specifically. Multiple folks that our you know, city has elected, right, have been caught up in cases that are just wrong, and they're dealt with, you know, development, right, and what they allowed for to happen, right, and they got a cut of some of that, right. So I guess, but to keep that piece short, I think that it's really wrong to have someone like a city official tell you like, oh, we're gonna be okay with this private development because it's gonna bring more resources for our neighborhood. We could do more cleanups. We could schedule more tree trimming, or plant more trees, or do sidewalk reparation, like, you know, fixing whatever, right? But I think that piece is wrong. I don't know. I just feel like the way that money is distributed in the city should be done in an equitable way, right? In terms of like, we should probably spend less money in policing and spend more money on fixing our streets and community programs and keeping folks housed, right? And so I think that the sourcing of public services provided by private development, it just sounds really wrong. I guess just from the foundation, it sounds really wrong. And I also, to the second piece of the question, I think that it's super critical for us to be also calculating the cost of getting folks that are without homes housed again, right? How many millions of dollars are getting invested in getting people housed again? And we should be using that, you know, like what is the cost of keeping people housed, right? And using those numbers. I just don't have time to crunch those numbers or the skills to crunch those numbers, but if the city has the resources, this is a great thing to work on, right? Like, what are the savings of keeping people housed? And if you supported Community Land Trust doing our work and preserving our communities, right? What are the cost savings of not using those funds in, like, doing the case management, all the things that come with getting people housed again, right? So I think that we don't have the complete ammo at this moment to be able to tell the city, like, hey, your whole thing is flawed, and you should actually be reallocating funds for our work and be prioritizing keeping your folks housed, right? Because they elected you. So just, I guess, but again, on the record, right? Just saying this. Thank you.
Well, yeah, and I would add too that there's a strong ideological component to that. I mean, the home ownership myth has been, or maybe it is a myth in sort of the sort of religious study sense of myth as being like an organizing story that we tell about ourselves. Is that we'll all eventually be homeowners, and tenancy is like this rite of passage that we pass through. And I think what's becoming clear is that it's a myth in more of the mythbuster sense of the word myth, that most of us aren't going to end up being homeowners, and that maybe thinking about homes as a way to build wealth instead of a place to live hasn't been really a productive way to think about it, because of the way our economy works, what has tended to happen is that the people best positioned to maximize the wealth gaining opportunities in housing have been able to do exactly that, and other people have not been. An increasingly large proportion of our housing now is owned by corporate actors, not just really big folks that get famous like the Blackstones of the world, but just mid-sized, corporate entities that are using housing primarily as a way to build wealth, and not building wealth in the way, that we were sort of taught that was going to happen when we were young. So I think there's a big narrative shift that has to happen, and a big shift in how people think about where they live and what housing is for.
Chris had a really good question about housing. We've been really focused on housing, but there's this other big thing that is happening around the economy, which is the small businesses and the impact that they're going through. And one thing that I have found, I guess, a little bit disheartening, depending on where you're sitting, is that business owners don't really have any rights. Remember reading somewhere that for leases for commercial sites, the law follows the lease. And so it sounds fine if you're like Target or something, because you're lawyered up and you got a gajillion people telling you whether it's good for you or not. But when you're a small business owner, you don't have that benefit. And a lot of times these leases are written in really language that is not accessible. Mm-hmm. And so Chris asked a really good question, if we would be open to introducing small scale retail corner stores in low-rise neighborhood residentials. And I said yes, partly because I happen to know that the operational cost for commercial units that are incorporated into housing construction, especially if it's new, tends to be very low. So it really does give the owners of those units an opportunity to really go deep in the rent and really offer really affordable rents to small business owners, and thereby supporting that sector of the economy, right? And then opening up even those opportunities further to folks that may not necessarily currently be involved in the formal economy or are, whatever, maybe folks coming together, but offering affordable rents in commercial spaces too is really important as part of thinking through planning and density and stuff, because we do want to be able to support local folks that whose job it is, or that make their living by being entrepreneurs at a smaller scale, not necessarily at the Target scale.
Yeah, my response to, and yeah, I agree with Sua, and to add to that, I mean, personally, I think that's great, but I think ultimately it comes down to, does the community want this? I think Oscar, you spoke to this. So if the community wants the corner store, great, let's get that going. If they don't think that's a need, then that's not for that community. So Ms. Kim brought up a great example of how there is all this development happening and it's not meeting the needs of her community. So again, it's so vital for the city to start, whatever they're doing, start reaching out to community members and asking, what do you guys need? And then creating development from there. And that could be done with CLT partnerships. as well as neighborhood councils, just a variety of community leadership to just ensure that different voices are being heard before development is happening. And one piece I want to say about neighborhood councils, I know there was a process where some developers would, you know, for their process to be approved, I guess, they need letters of support. Mechanisms like that, you know, not just those letters of support, but different mechanisms that beefs up their, you know, proposal to develop. It'll be great to give them more teeth to ensure that that is meeting the needs of the community. Whatever they're planning to develop is meeting those needs. So it would be great for the city to start looking into these systems in place and providing more autonomy or more empower the community to have more say in what's developed in their neighborhoods before it actually happens. So put that out there.
I think I want to bring up a question about vacant lots and how we activate vacant lots or abandoned buildings. But I also want to link it to something you just said, Leslie, which I think is this question where we all work in situations where we're desperately trying to get the community involved and really want to have their voice be lifted up and be part of what shapes the built environment. And yet Los Angeles is a city who has a history of having a lot of neighborhood input and a lot of neighborhood control over what gets built. And that, in fact, because it came, you know, at the behest largely of very white and wealthy communities, has been part of what's driven segregation, low density, and exclusionary housing practices. So how do we balance that? Like, how do we balance, I'm asking kind of a two-part question. How do we get all of this land activated while incorporating the voices of kind of neglected communities and tempering the voices of communities that have maybe had a bit more say than they should have? You all can fix that right now, I'm pretty sure. Let us know.
Good point. You know, the real estate purists out there would say, no more community, it's too much. Oh my God, entitlements. But I am not a purist real estate person, so it's like, who cares? You know, it's not just about checking the box, click. And I did my neighborhood engagement because I had this one meeting. There are better ways of actually getting neighborhood engagement that are smarter, that are more efficient, and that are actually incorporating like the true needs of the community. I really wish there's a few folks that I can think about. I really wish they could speak on this because they're very good at actually doing like meaningful engagement, right? But meaningful doesn't mean just like saying, okay, we had the charrette, this is all the input that came through, let's make the colors green. You know, it's a lot deeper than that. It's really engaging the community where there's things that you don't necessarily have to do to know what the community is and how you're engaging them in what you're building or what you're doing or what you're designing. One of them is coming back to the rooms, right? Miss Kim was really right. Like, what are you doing building freaking studios in a family neighborhood? You don't need to go and knock on doors and understand that that's the community makeup and the household makeup, right? And so you can begin by understanding what the layout and the makeup of the community that is the new community that is being eyed because things are still affordable to scoop up and buy, right? And so I believe like having a community input process as a must as part of the permitting and entitlements kind of processes that LA has is a must. Like we can't skip that. But how you do it, it doesn't necessarily have to make you like pick your period, go like the radius around the 10 block, knock on everybody's door, give them a flyer, call them, or, you know, do a Zoom meeting and then say, okay, check, I got 7 people and they commented and they like green walls. Like that's not it. It's really being attentive and observant first and getting as much information as you can about the makeup of that community and then beginning the conversation there. And that includes what can community afford, even when it comes to the market spaces. Leslie's right. At the end of the day, even if you can build a commercial unit, and should you, right? Does the community want it? And then the second one, if you do, what kind of business are you going to put on there, right? What kind of business are you going to put something there that the folks in your building can't even afford, right? So it happens a lot in affordable housing. There are commercial spaces, and sometimes the stores are inaccessible, or something's inaccessible that comes in, right? So it is being just smarter about the way you engage folks, and then actually speaking to that at a deeper level versus just the way it's designed or the plans that it should have or whatever.
Yeah, to your question, Cynthia, about different voices in the room regarding what's needed. I mean, I would recommend to the city, if they were to create or host these spaces, to reach out to folks who are really, I mean, there's so many great people that are really good at facilitating those type of discussions. I don't know if it's if you call it transformative justice, or it's not, I mean, I guess it's not really like inherently a conflict space, but yeah, just coming in, a facilitator that comes in with the intention of knowing that there's people from all walks of life, and they can kind of guide that space in a way that everyone feels heard and the needs of the room are being met. So yeah, I mean, I don't have expertise. I would love to have that, but yeah, I would recommend creating those spaces and allowing experts and guiding those spaces to reach a resolution that works for folks.
I see that Sonia has her hand raised, but I just wanted to do like a quick piece on this. Trust Atelier worked on a project called Free Lots LA a couple of years ago, and that, I guess, kind of like grassroots led project, which was about activating the like vacant lots in South LA, right? It actually became a city like program, and they have several different vacant lots throughout Los Angeles City that can be activated for a given amount of time. And so I'm just thinking of, you know, like, I guess that took some time to kind of like build up for the city to be able to do that. And I'm just thinking that there's models that could become available in each district to be able to fund community organizations, community land trusts preferably, to try and find ways to activate those lots and what is the best use of those lots, and find ways to identify who's the owner of those properties to like, you know, transfer those lots, right, if they're not using them, to be used by the community, and have a whole community process that it's like led through the, like a, you know, sort of like public-private partnership maybe idea. And that could be like a tangible thing that actually, like, we're just growing from the Free Lots LA program, right? And I guess I'm thinking more reformist kind of like style right now, but like that's a path towards kind of like how can we activate these spaces. But I guess I'll be quiet and I see Sonia.
Yeah, and
There's Nicole who had a really good question, and if we can get to both.
I think we should. What do you want to start with? Sonia, who's had her hand up for a long time. I'll try to, I think she's unmuted now.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I had someone come to the door. So two things. Thanks for sharing that information in regards to the vacant property. And I know we didn't touch bases on the code enforcement, because I'm talking about within our region, we have a lot of apartment buildings just being closed through, and well, not just apartment buildings, but apartments and motels that's being closed through due to code enforcement for multiple reasons. And then also we have a lot of vacant property out here. So I was just wondering, how do we you know, touch bases on that? And I did see where you said public partnership. But I did want to also, and I do apologize if I'm a little bit out of turn, like I said, somebody knocked on the door, but I wanted to address one of the things that was lifted during the conversation, far as doing like the corner stores. I come like back home from Wisconsin, so we call them mom and pop stores. And we're saying, you know, someone had mentioned what is the need, you know, we don't want to have stores come in where people can't afford to shop. But what came to my mind is when we look at the statistics of how dollars are circulated within communities. So we know Caucasian money stays within their communities for X amount of days, Hispanic, so on and so forth. But we also know that the Black dollars, you know, only stay in for like 6 hours. I think the Hispanic is like 56 hours. And then for the Caucasian is multiple days. But we going to do something as far as, you know, small, you know, businesses or mom and pop retail, that we have to be intentional about making sure that we bring in retails and services that's going to generate and motivate dollars to stay within our community that we are utilizing as community land trusts or cooperative housing. So that was just another comment I wanted to add.
Can I take a stab at the first? Thank you, Sonia. That was a really good comment there. One of our colleagues here, your first question about how do we gain access to maybe the hotel rooms or vacant lands in the area, that I saw one of our colleagues here, Leslie, I think Jonathan, he's working on some policy legislation that could actually support with that. And Jonathan, I'm sorry, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I think you would be really good at talking about it if you're on.
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Jonathan. I'm an attorney with the Legal Aid Foundation of Los Angeles. And I think what Sue is referring to is our opportunity to purchase legislation that the Los Angeles CLT Coalition has been thinking about for 10 months now and kind of developing what their model policy would be. And this policy, essentially, it's modeled after the Tenant Opportunity to Purchase Act that's existed in Washington, D.C. for some time, and the Community Opportunity to Purchase Act that was enacted in San Francisco recently. And it essentially would pause the sale of rental units in a jurisdiction and allow certain qualified community organizations to have a first opportunity to make offers to purchase those. So not forcing sales to anyone, but kind of delaying the purchase timeline a little bit, just to make sure that CLTs and nonprofit affordable housing developers and tenants themselves have an opportunity to actually participate at the same level that a corporate investor or speculator would be able to. And then it would also afford some of those purchasers a right of first refusal. So if they don't end up making a sale during this exclusive window, they would have the right to match a third-party offer.
So while that explicitly talks about residential in nature, and it wouldn't necessarily apply directly to some of those, like the vacant land and the hotel rooms, I think if we took an example from that, those are the kind of policies that would help in those situations, particularly when it comes to public land and hotel rooms. A lot of them, I wouldn't say they become public, but they're being used in a public way with public funds. So I would kind of say that they might be a little public. So those are the kind of legislations that would support that if we applied those more specifically to the kind of properties that you're talking about. Sonia, I think that would be really helpful. Related to your second question or your second comment, I do agree with you. It is really important to make sure that whatever we develop caters to community that is already there and can, I mean, it's a balance, right? But like if you're building an affordable housing complex and you have commercial space in the ground floor, you should make sure that that commercial space is serving folks that you serve within the residential area of that complex, right? And so you're right, it's really important to make sure that those things actually coincide.
Hey, can I
Just really, oh,
I was going to
sorry,
push
Cynthia.
Travis to address this question Nicole asked, which I think we've already gotten to a little bit, but what do you do when a community is really split? And, I know we mentioned having trained mediators in there who can really help out and really trying to prioritize the needs of people who've lived there for a long time. But I think it's an important question because in some ways it's the one we're grappling with writ large for all of the city of like, what do you do when everybody doesn't agree? How do you prioritize? Whose voices get priority? Whose voices get priority now and whose should be prioritized more?
That's that's the question, isn't it? I mean, the way I would see it is ideally, if you were forming a CLT or even a housing co-op, ideally you would do the work from the beginning of who, like, what is our mission? Who do we want to what do we want to focus on? Have that work done. And then when there's disagreements or even conflict, that could be a place you could go back to and go, okay, this is a reminder of what we're trying to do. And so we all agreed on this. How do we agree on a strategy to meet this? Because it's not so much the value, because you've all agreed on the value, but there seems to be disagreement on the strategy to make that value happen. So let's work together. And that's the hard part, right? Figuring out collectively what strategy works for everyone to make that goal happen. So yeah, if my community very much values mediation, and that has really helped kind of maneuver through that. Those skills are very helpful, or just reaching out to outside mediation sources and facilitation sources to help you go through that. But I recommend not shying away from that. Just, I mean, if you're having community, there's going to be conflict. And I recommend not shying away from it, but going through it, because you become so much stronger going through it, and having more of an understanding of where you and your neighbors are coming from. So.
No, thanks, Leslie. Oh, Sue, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I see, I can't quite get the full scope of everybody that's on the line, but I know there must be some of our colleagues on the line who've had also experience on this topic that can really speak from that. I don't know if anybody wants to volunteer, if they can add to any of that, because that's a really important question, because it almost happens day one. It's like right away. So I don't know, I see a lot of folks with really good experience on that front. I don't know if anybody might want to say anything.
Rolling for hands.
Hi, this is Michelle Wong. I'm on the board of the BVCLT, and I've been part of the same community that Leslie is in for the last 20 years. And yes, I think it's very exceptional that we have a community that values mediation, and that it's taken a while, but has developed a culture whereby we agree towards, finding a common ground. And, right now, we are also really working towards being even more inclusive with language justice. So, being able to translate our meetings simultaneously. It's quite a challenge. But, I think that if folks can at least agree to a process, that's sort of the first step. And that, these processes have worked for other communities. It's being in an intentional community is kind of like a self-help, self-growth program that never stops. So hopefully, people would be willing to think about it that way. But it's a trade-off. But it's also, highly beneficial, especially times like these.
Yes.
especially times.
I think you make a good point about these times that we're living in. So I wonder, as kind of a wrapping up question, if we can maybe close out by saying a little bit about what being at home all the time has suggested for us in terms of what's important about building homes, land trusts in particular. If you guys want to each make some closing remarks about that.
Yes, it's feeling safe. And that means at all levels, like I guess on an emotional, mental health level, just and physical, right? Just being safe and ensuring that regardless of the kind of space you have, there's access to a different space if you need one, like open space or quiet space, and having that there for you when needed.
That's quite a lovely sentiment. Oscar and Leslie, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, then this time I mean, to circle back on my initial thought at the beginning is I'm more appreciative of my space and more committed to ensuring that, or to helping other tenants have this space where I have a community that we're helping each other work through this. And it saddens me that so many people are isolated right now and you know, they're battling mental health issues and isolation because they don't have that. And I just hope the city looks at this and considers, you know, more community-driven spaces, more housing that fosters community and green space, which also helps with mental health issues. So yeah, just a place of appreciation and hope.
Oh, yes. And Oscar, do you want to add a quick word?
Yeah, and just thinking about how this process of COVID-19 has, for some, has become like a transaction headache. You know, like, oh, we got the folks can't pay the rent, so mortgages can't get paid, right? So X, Y, and Z, like where there's that. But then there's also like the piece like we should like maybe pause and and be like, this is a global pandemic, and we should be okay with changing things and being okay with slowing down and pausing and forgiving, right? Some financial pieces, right? So I think that I think that I just want to add that that's something that I think that our CLTs might be stronger in, and going above and beyond, working with our resident members and making sure that this does not, like, they feel like they can come to us, you know.
I think that's a great note to end on. All of the things that all of you said, I think they speak, you know, not only to what's been shown to be important about a home during a pandemic, but in a lot of ways, what is really powerful about the community land trust model in terms of providing that sense of serenity and safety and health and well-being and community that you can't get if you're just, you know, chasing a dollar. Well, it's 6:30. I think that means our time has come to an end. I really appreciate everybody coming and all the audience members sharing their thoughts, and especially the panelists for talking so eloquently about this topic. And thank you for the city for inviting us to this listening session.
Yes, thank you. You all. Thank you, Cynthia.
I'll do a little queen wave.
And
thank you,
Cynthia,
everyone. I'm gonna go on camera. Thank you, everyone, for the great panel discussion. I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you for attending.
Thank you so much. I just wanted to make sure that we thank Cynthia too for really doing such a fantastic job facilitating.
Yes, thank you.
And let me thank our three panelists, Leslie, Oscar, and Sua as well. And thank my city colleagues, both from the Mayor's Office and the Department of City Planning, that joined us. I know they learned a lot, as did I. And very quickly, I want to say that the recordings for all of these sessions will be posted soon on the Low-Rise Low-Rise Housing Initiative website, forgive me. And we will share that contact information and that URL with all of your organizations. And finally, I just want to say that the comments about engagement and really rethinking and continue to the need to continue to rethink engagement were so well taken. And I just want to say that we see this as the beginning of a process that will require many rounds of engagement. The designs we're asking for from architects will be the basis of another round of communication. We want and expect to take those designs back to the community, ask for feedback as a way of moving this conversation forward. And so all of those comments about how you navigate the nuances and complexities of this engagement over time are really important. I just want to underscore those and thank all of you for making those. And again, thanks for spending part of an evening with us, and have a great night, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you, Christopher and Alejandro.
Right.
Thank you all. Good night.
Thanks,
Stay
everyone.
blessed.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks all.